Good afternoon. I'm Councilmember at Large Derek Green and the current president of Democratic Municipal Officials. I want to welcome you to another edition of our Municipal Mondays. This opportunity allows us to connect with municipal leaders all around the country about very important, crucial issues that we're dealing with. Today's topic is something that a lot of us have dealt with over the years. I know myself in particular in Philadelphia, we've dealt with a lot of different preemption issues, and today we'll be hearing from preemption expert Mark Pertschuk, who will be giving us an overview of 2021 state preemption landscape and what the Biden administration means in reference to local control. We'll also have a panel of DMOs to relay their own experiences in dealing with state preemption and really reflect on Mark's information and what it'll mean for them and for all of us in 2021. You will have an opportunity to answer questions and to learn and give some perspective of how we can better represent our local voters as we deal with preemption issues and how we can make sure that what we're trying to accomplish at the local level still can be implemented. If you have any questions for our guests, please submit those questions to our chat feature, and please make sure you indicate your city and state when asking your question. At this time, I'd like to introduce our guest expert, Mark Pertschuk. Mark is the founder and director of Grassroots Change and the Preemption Watch Project. He's a former president and executive director of Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights. While at that organization, he managed grassroots campaigns for the airline smoking ban and state and local tobacco control laws in dozens of states. In 1995, he co-founded and served as executive director of Californians for Responsible Gun Laws, and beginning in 1999, served as the legislative director for the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence in Washington, D.C. And now I'll turn over our Municipal Monday to Mark Pertschuk to give a brief presentation on what local leaders can expect on the preemption front in 2021. Thank you, Mark, for being here.
Thank you. This is a great opportunity, and I want to cover the material that I think some of you know, some of you don't know, but I think the other presenters and all of you who are participating will probably have as much to offer as I can about what's happening on the ground. So let's start with this and make sure it works. Okay, how is this? Are you getting me with this?
We are, thank you, Mark.
Okay, great. So first of all, I wanted to start by just putting a sharp point on how current and concerning the issue of preemption is. There are opportunities, there's a lot of opportunities for stopping bad preemption and for, to a limited degree, and we'll talk about it, repealing preemption, state preemption that's already in place. But just looking at sort of what's happening now, I look back literally at the last, I don't know, 45 days. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of what's going on. You know, Colorado, the issues in the states, Colorado, plastic bags. These are preemption laws that technically we refer to this type of preemption as ceiling preemption, but what we found is that the term preemption really means ceiling preemption to those of us who deal with the issue and to anybody else who's really looking at it, even scholars. So when I say preemption, I'm referring to ceiling preemption rather than minimum standards, which can be called floor preemption. At any rate, Colorado, Florida, marijuana, firearms, local zoning requirements. This is for capital, industrial agriculture. Oh, someone's got to get the phone. This gives you a sense of what's happening right now. I really wanted to bring this up to date before getting to some of the basics about what we know and what we can do. The good news, or the potentially good news, is that also within the last 45 days, legislation that's been introduced to repeal preemption. And again, Kentucky, tobacco availability to minors, Florida, all kinds of issues in Florida, as those who are there know, but potentially repealing preemption, or at least publicizing the issue of preemption and repeal, and all the way to West Virginia, which in getting a report card from the American Lung Association regarding tobacco control and tobacco addiction, the one positive thing was that West Virginia municipalities retain control to a significant degree for local policy, local ordinances, and so that is the one example where preemption, lack of preemption, is very, very important to any kind of progress. So the forms that preemption take, and again, this is something that is fundamental, and that many of you will be familiar with at least some of these. But first of all, most of the preemption we see is the traditional form of a preemption clause. That is to say, it's right out front, and it's either an amendment or it's an original language. And what I should point out, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that most of the examples and most of the history of preemption and express preemption in public health or public safety legislation has been regulatory void preemption, which is to say that the laws that are adopted, the preemption laws, tend to be relatively short and provide no substantive protection for communities or individuals, but they take away typically all local authority. Amendments, as I mentioned. The other thing we're seeing, and of course Lauren and others who are coming, who are on this webinar can address this as well, but one thing we've seen is the use of fiscal mechanisms, which is basically just in one way or another taking away money or taking away the authority of communities to raise money if they adopt any kind of policy. It can range from firearms to tobacco and on and on. And we'll talk a little bit about that further on in the webinar. The other things we're seeing and are to be aware of are preemption of, rather than preempting an issue or even a range of issues, a state will adopt very, very, very difficult and challenging procedural barriers to, for example, local taxation authority. Instead of coming right out and saying, we're going to starve the community of revenue, there is trickier language. Then again, and this is in the same category in a way, rather than preempting a specific public health, social justice policy at the local level, simply limiting or eliminating the authority of typically the state and subdivisions of the state to move forward on any kind of ballot measures or other direct democracy. Another thing we need to be aware of, very concerning, but so far relatively limited in terms of the number of states, is blanket preemption, a type of preemption, whether it's through fiscal mechanisms or straight substantive preemption clauses that eliminate a wide range of authority, eliminate the jurisdiction of over a wide range of issues. And that's been threatened in many states and only adopted in a handful. And again, Lauren may address that shortly. The other thing that is of concern is extreme preemption, which has also been called super preemption or punitive preemption. So far, it is only manifested itself in the case of firearms and ammunition. And this is where a state, and the 43 states already preempt local authority over firearms and ammunition to some degree or another. But these measures are on top of existing preemption in a state, and they include things like individual fines for elected officials who seek to pass or implement firearms laws, and various kinds of fiscal punishments for any community that does anything in the policy realm about gun violence, firearms and ammunition. And And then, as I mentioned, regulatory void is what we're facing almost all the time. These are not laws that include effective public health measures for, whether it's nutrition or tobacco or firearms or any of a number of issues. These are basically empty bills that are really just preemption clauses that take away authority and don't do anything to address a problem. And the funny thing is, which will be quite obvious to most of you here, is that any state or federal legislation in the public that we face, or the things that we want, need to have some sort of savings clause, an anti-preemption clause, and usually those can be very, very simple, and the simple is the better. Our organization, Grassroots Change, was founded in 2009, and Preemption Watch has emerged as our primary project. We started with doing some research on behalf of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, focused on key informants around the country who are involved in one way or another, the elected officials, appointed officials, grassroots organizers, and so on. And these issues, we interviewed people who had expertise or experience in all of these issues, mostly people who had experience with effective grassroots movements. As part of our work, we developed a preemption map, which you can find at preemptionwatch.org, and we cover 8 issues, but mostly with a nexus to public health. And that is a tool which you may want to take advantage of to see where we are. And also you can dig down, and we link it to the actual statutes, and in some cases case law, but mostly statutes. And this is an example. If you click on firearms, you see the 43 states that have preemption in the realm of firearms and ammunition, and then a short list explaining what those laws do with links to the actual statutes. And we also have the capacity to link on any of the 50 states, and then and see what areas they preempt in, anywhere from none to 8, although no state has preempted in all 8 areas so far. There are some who are trying. At any rate, I want to very briefly address federal. As was mentioned up front, we have a different environment at the federal level for policy. And I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that the current administration, pretty much, this is very similar to the Obama administration, has already laid down a strong policy of opposing federal preemption. And these are examples of things that have happened, but also opportunities. In an executive order regarding travel, there's a clause that says, federal agencies, the federal government should not preempt stronger measures at the state or local level. And in an article that was recently published in the Washington Monthly, it was pointed out that the Federal Communications Commission, which is likely to have a majority of Democrats, has the opportunity to preempt state legislation. This is a little complicated. To preempt state preemption in the area of broadband. So state legislatures which have tried to take away the authority, or succeeded in taking away the authority to implement municipal broadband, the FCC potentially has the authority to preempt that and protect local authority, municipal authority in the area of broadband. In terms of fighting preemption, we've developed something I'm not going to go into in any detail, but we've developed a strategic model that summarizes what we found in the field as an effective approach to stopping preemption before it passes. I should say that stopping preemption historically has been much easier than trying to repeal preemption after it's been adopted. And so the key components of that, and anybody who wants more information on this can go to our website or contact us, are monitoring. And I think the one thing to say that, and I think that people, many on this webinar will know that you need to expect preemption before you see anything. If you wait, it's often too late for an amendment or for a bill, usually an amendment. Often amendments that come at the last minute. Again, there are some cases in which lawyers and litigation have been helpful in limiting or overturning preemption, but again, it's very rare. Generally speaking, the state has the legal authority to adopt ceiling preemption. It's just usually a very bad idea. And again, there is a model. It's in the smoke-free area. 9 states have repealed state preemption of local smoke-free ordinances since 2002, but that's really the only model we have for successfully repealing preemption across the states. In terms of building grassroots and fighting preemption, one thing that's key for folks on this call is that at the state level as well as the local level, all players, including grassroots players, really need to be firm on preemption. If they're not, that's often the reason that preemption passes. There's one group or sometimes occasionally an individual who will go along with preemption, and then that facilitates state preemption usually at the last minute in the legislature. And finally, the importance of engaging grassroots. And one thing I would say, one piece of this, which I've brought out, is media advocacy. One of the great tools that we have, and it can be used very effectively, is free media. Generally speaking, these laws, let's say the punitive preemption, the super preemption of firearm and ammunition jurisdiction at the local level, is very unpopular. And it's unpopular with media, and it's unpopular with voters. As a result of that, it is very important to plan ahead and be prepared to do strategic media, including messaging about local authority, preemption, state interference in local action, and so on. Let me check in, Nils. What's my time looking like?
You've got another 8 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. I can do that. So again, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot happening virtually every day in this area. We've got some interesting things to pay attention to at the federal level, and the media is very focused on that, and that's appropriate because there are things that deserve coverage at the state level, at state and local levels. But one thing it does is it's an opportunity for those who are promoting state preemption and are opposed to local authority over health and safety and social justice. It's an opportunity to get this stuff done without much media attention. So it is a dangerous time, as I think it's been alluded to. And I would point you in the direction of some resources. There's a lot of resources out there. These are just some of them, but we track on our website research, and some of the research is very, very helpful. For example, a peer-reviewed journal article, Starving Counties, Squeezing Cities, Tax and Expenditure Limits in the United States. Very useful, can be very useful information, and also help understand the severity of the preemption risk. There's also another webinar, there's a video of a webinar I would point you to. It's also on our website, that was completed in November of the last year, which comes from a very progressive political point of view. And you might, if you're interested in this issue, you might want to have a look at that. The other presenters are fantastic, and we cover a number of states: Missouri, Oregon, Washington, and others. And again, grassrootschange.net or preemptionwatch.org go to the same place essentially, and we have tools that you may want to take advantage of. And again, back to the preemption map, and just to point out one of the things that the preemption map lets us do. So we see how the pro-gun lobby has been very successful in taking away local authority across the country. There are major exceptions like California and Hawaii and New Jersey, but basically state preemption is the norm. On the other hand, in some of the other issues we track, there's been a lot of success in stopping preemption. This is nutrition, preemption of nutrition, including some state laws, unfortunately, that preempt local authority to adopt soda taxes, which is something we may address in the Q&A. And again, a success story. It was the tobacco industry in the 1980s that really invented the strategy of regulatory void preemption as a 50-state strategy. And as a result of the success of advocates at the state level, grassroots advocates, and leaders in the state legislatures, again, 9 states have repealed. So as a practical matter, nationwide, there's still an enormous amount of opportunity to adopt and strengthen smoke-free policies. So at any rate, this is me, and again, I'm here for Q&A, and after this webinar, please feel free to go to our website or get in touch with me personally. I'm happy to talk. I'm looking forward to hearing the others in the Q&A. Thank you.
Mark, thank you for your presentation. You gave me some perspective on why elections are important, because elections have consequences. The idea of preempting preemption at the federal level, and your example from the FCC is a classic example of why it's important that we are so engaged and get our voters to be engaged in all elections at federal, state, and local. You gave some information regarding how we can help to support the issues that our voters elected us for. They elected us at a local level to enact policies that work best for our jurisdictions. And when a state attempts to preempt that type of work, it really creates a lot of challenges for us to deliver on behalf of our constituents. In your presentation, you talked about monitor and anticipate, unify, and engage. Can you give some examples of the best way for local elected officials to use that strategy in order to stop preemption? Because as you stated, it's much harder to repeal legislation than to stop it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one example which is a little bit unique is the area of gun control, firearms and ammunition. And so, as I mentioned, most states have adopted regulatory void preemption. They've taken away all or virtually all of the authority that municipalities have to adopt laws addressing gun violence and gun deaths and injuries. And the strategy now of the pro-gun lobby, the National Rifle Association, and others is to build on that preemption with these punitive measures that target individual city councils or county boards of supervisors and individual electeds with extreme punishments, including the statutes usually include a provision for to get elected out of office for implementing or considering or adopting a gun control measure. So that's one that I would expect that in virtually every state that has not yet done it. And the one thing I would say is that Nebraska has done, the advocates in Nebraska have done a very good job of stopping the gun lobby's effort in that state to strengthen preemption and add punitive provisions. And they've been successful so far.
And Mark, thank you for that example, especially from your background and all the work you've done regarding gun rights. I know we have questions from various members of DMO who submitted us questions prior to this call. First question received from Councilman Matt Keating of Eugene, Oregon.
And Councilmember Keating, you've been asked to unmute. If you're available, you're free to ask your question. If not, we can read the text of that question.
Great, thanks, Nils. Yeah, I appreciate the conversation around preemption. Feel free to read the text because I'm interested in navigating the waters similar to how Philadelphia did in implementing a soda tax. And so Nils, if you wouldn't mind reading the inquiry.
Sure thing. So as stated, with the exception of alcohol, cannabis, tobacco, and gasoline, I live in a non-sales tax state. However, I see an opportunity for a municipal consumption fee on soda, especially if dedicated to raise money for health and human services. Could you please advise?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question, and that is one of the very hot issues. And the reason for that is that the handful of communities around the country, California, California has frozen the ability to do that, which is another story. But Boulder, for example, Philadelphia, as a wonderful example, have adopted these local measures that raise revenue. And it's very important because, first of all, there's strong evidence, you probably know this, that those taxes or fees, when they're significant enough, when they're large enough, they really impact consumption. That is to say, people who are at risk of overconsumption and the disease which that soda causes are consuming far less soda. That's the first thing. The second thing is that taxes or fees that on sugar sweetened beverages that are significant enough typically raise pretty good money at the local level, and that money stays at the local level. It can't be taken away by the state when there's a would-be emergency and used for something else. Usually the emergency is something that the soda industry would like to promote. So at any rate, it is a great opportunity. Of course, the 50 states all have different policy constraints and opportunities, but beyond that, it's a really important, I've seen it myself, it really is a community transforming thing, especially when the money is invested wisely wisely in the community, schools, organizations which serve the communities, the populations in the communities that are targeted by the soda industry, and so on.
And just to follow up on Mark's point, and Councilmember Keating, I was involved in the soda tax, or the sugar and sweetened beverage tax, as we called it here in Philadelphia during my first term. I think it's very important that you really build public support for this type of legislation. Previous mayors actually tried to do this type of legislation. However, the way we positioned and I think got public sentiment to support this was how we were going to use the dollars. And the dollars were going to be used specifically for investments in our parks, recreation centers, and libraries, which really had basic investment, but not transformational investment, as well as for a pre-K program that we said that by us making this investment is going to have long-term benefits for the citizens of the city of Philadelphia, making sure that as many young people as possible will have access to pre-kindergarten education. So how you're going to use those dollars are very important. We also spent a significant amount of time with our city solicitor and other pro bono and some pro bono attorneys to help us in crafting legislation in a very specific way, based on my understanding as attorney as well, but also based on past case law and we've seen at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court regarding preemption issues. And then just one last piece, because we do elect judges in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, having a Pennsylvania Supreme Court that was more favored to our perspectives also helped in that regard. But we could go into much more detail about that, but I want to go into some of the other questions. Also, we have Council Member from York, Pennsylvania, Councilmember Alan Vandersloot with a question.
And Councilmember Vandersloot, you are now free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask the question, or I can ask that from what you submitted.
Okay, I guess my question is, I'm a council member here in West York Borough, so it's not a city, but I guess we're interested in that idea. I know a couple of years ago we were looking at decriminalizing marijuana, recreational marijuana, and it did not pass. It was a close vote in council, but we were just wondering if you're seeing that type of preemption issues, especially now that there's a lot of some of our politicians in Pennsylvania are favoring legalizing it, but we just wonder how boroughs might be affected in a state such as Pennsylvania.
Well, there's preemption in two regards regarding marijuana. Obviously, this is a hot issue in general, not just in regards to preemption. And the issue is there's of course federal preemption, which has become a significantly less of a problem recently, where the state and the localities within the state cannot so-called preempt a federal statute. but that issue is really waning as a barrier for communities to take action. At the state level, at the local level, it's really a question of state law. So each state is different. The reality and why the grassroots and media are so important in this debate is that the communities can take action and are less there's less pressure from outside forces at the state level. At the local level, a lot of the pressure comes from individual constituents who really have access to their elected officials. So the other area that I think is come up, and just to be aware of with marijuana, is as states pass laws, either ballot measures or statutes that legalize marijuana or other drugs, one of the issues that's come up a lot is whether or not cities and counties, subdivisions of the state, keep the power to regulate or tax marijuana themselves. So that's a very big issue and one to pay attention to. We need to make sure that communities have the power both to adopt taxes and other regulations around marijuana, but also retain the power to regulate marijuana in a way that protects young people and the community at large.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then our last question for this segment is coming from our former Charlotte, North Carolina Councilmember LaWanda Mayfield, also former member of the DMO board. And we'd like to hear from Councilmember Mayfield.
Thank you so much. I was listening and learning since North Carolina is a DMO state. So hello, everyone. Happy New Year. So I'm learning to try to figure out what we need to look at here with our state legislature. So I am staying quiet and listening today. I did not raise my hand up this time.
Oh, thank you for joining us. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. But I am interested in learning for North Carolina, since we are a Dillon rule, and our General Assembly has definitely preempted on multiple occasions. The most recent with the creation of HB2, but as we think about how we move forward with these other conversations, thinking of ways for us to help support our legislatures to keep us moving forward.
And please feel free to reach out to me by text or phone or email. I'd be happy to follow up with you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Mayfield. In addition, we're going to briefly move into our next segment. For those who have additional questions, feel free to put those in the chat feature, and we'll try to get those questions in during our Municipal Monday hour. We're now going to have two of our our DMOs join the panel with Mark. I'll introduce both of them. The first is Tempe City Council member Lauren Kuby, and Lauren was elected on a sustainability platform in 2014 and re-elected in March 2018. She is a longtime advocate for worker protections, equity, and climate change action. Lauren is a recognized national champion for cities as incubators of innovation. Veteran journalist Juan Gonzalez featured Lauren in his book, Reclaiming Gotham, citing her as evidence of a growing movement of cities taking progressive action and challenging legislative interference in local democracies. Ms. Kuby has led Tampa's efforts for social, economic, and environmental justice, including equal pay, earned sick days, climate action plans, affordable housing, animal welfare, urban forestry, transparency, and campaign finance reform. She spearheaded a dark money disclosure amendment to the city's charter, garnering 91% support from the voters for her efforts exposing the corruptive influence of money in politics. Councilmember Kuby was featured in the inaugural episode of the MSNBC docuseries American Swamp. We'll also be joined in this panel by Mayor Ian Baltutis. Mayor Baltutis was elected in 2015 is a 2008 Business Entrepreneurship graduate of Elon University. He has worked for businesses both large and small in roles that range from customer service to technology support to logistics and management. He also managed purchasing, logistics, and ERP system integration for Honda Power Equipment Manufacturing from 2007 to 2011. Mayor Baltutis is a strong supporter of American manufacturing. He founded his company Vibration Solution LLC around the idea of turning the standard business model upside down, creating a company that is lean, efficient, and nimble. His foresight and leadership have allowed the company to reach and profit from hundreds of niche markets that other companies cannot serve. Today, the company competes on a global scale while continuing to create local jobs. He regularly lectures to students and business professionals of all ages around the country about the future of international business, innovation, careers for social good, and the power of the internet. And I affectionately call Mayor Baltutis the Maker Mayor. So with that, I'd like to welcome both Tempe Council Member Lauren Kuby and Mayor Ian Baltutis to the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Derek.
All right. And as we open our panel, I just want to remind DMOs on the call to submit their questions in the chat function. And you're welcome to ask questions to both Mark and our panelists. And to start, I'd like to hear from our panelists on their recent experiences with state preemption and how they dealt with it.
Lauren, you want to start things off?
Sure, I'm happy to start. So I'm here to say that preemption can be deadly. And I think about our governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, and back in the spring, he prohibited cities from taking any action beyond what the state was taking to fight COVID. He eventually relented after the hard-fought advocacy of our mayors, our women mayors, frankly, from Phoenix and Tucson and Flagstaff, and Kirsten Sinema, who just would not let up on this effort. So cities were eventually allowed to have masks, but our cities still, we have a mask mandate, but we do not have a statewide mask mandate. And that has resulted in loss of life. And that may sound histrionic, but it really truly is not, because his executive order prevents us from closing bars. It prevents us from prohibiting indoor dining. And we know that small gatherings can be really conducive to this virus. So, COVID fundamentally and the preemptions on our actions have been really deadly for our state. Right now in our state, I mean, we're going to fight who's the stepchild or something, the poster child for preemption. But Arizona, man, we have some real challenges in the past. And this year in this session, we have a bill called SB 1487, and it makes it harder for cities to hire outside counsel and fight for communities. So we can't sign on, for instance, to a class action suit. We would have to have our own attorney take on the opioid industry, or take on the producers of PFAS and PFOS that have polluted our water streams. We'd have to take on our own lawsuit. We wouldn't be able to join in a class action suit. So that is that's an existential threat that we're facing, and that frankly will hurt our residents and hurt our neighborhoods. And then as another example, there's legislation proposed at HB 2310 this year that will prevent police reform, reimagining, restructuring. It basically will punish cities that reduce their police budget by more than 10%. And it doesn't matter, why or how, or if it's because of a COVID budget, you're cutting budgets all around. It would actually allow any member of the legislature to go to the Attorney General to investigate any city that reduces their police budget by greater than 10%. And if that investigation proves that happened, they could withhold all of our state shared revenue, which is rather draconian, wouldn't you say? It's pretty shocking. And we're hoping we can push this back with the help of activists and with the help of just, doesn't matter what your political party is, we should be able to decide our own budgets. In the case of Tempe, and this legislation is aimed at Tempe, we have a very wonderful new mayor who has taken police reform and police reimagining to an important level. We have a task force. We met all throughout the fall with 25 residents of our city, and we're coming up on a lot of possible ideas, and one is to adopt basically the cahoots model that is so wonderful and present in Eugene, Oregon. And it's not cutting the budget as so much as it's going to reimagine and repurpose those funds in human services, and maybe not in the police department. And lo and behold, our police are in favor of this. They think this should happen. They don't think they should be the ones that are working with the homeless community. That's not the best way to get folks into a continuum of care who are on the streets. So this is an existential threat that we'll be fighting. And I could say we have success. We do have success in pushing back some of the more insane legislation, but we are always on guard here in Arizona and fighting a lot of preemption bills this session.
Awesome. Well, I will kick things off and touch on COVID. But before I do that, shout out to Luana and our NC chapter folks. If you're not involved with the DMO local chapter, please get involved. So here in North Carolina, we saw similar COVID preemption where in cities like my community of Burlington, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were working with our big box retailers and retailers of all sizes to figure out what occupancy rules should be. And we came to an agreement kind of across all these different businesses with the management saying, what should our fire code ratios be for this? And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, the governor kicked the legs out from under us and preempted cities and caved to the retail industry and basically allowed half occupancy, which in a Walmart is thousands of people being able to cram into that Walmart during a pandemic. And so we saw stuff like that most recently. But as Mark touched on here in North Carolina, if you look at some of the maps, and Luana touched on this too, House Bill 2, which is our anti-discrimination type fight, has been ongoing for many, many years. And it's actually coming back around now. The preemption legislation expired in December. And so now we're working with our individual municipalities to navigate non-discrimination ordinances and to explore how they can do that on a city by city level. And I'm optimistic that we can thread the needle on this and not poke the bear in our legislature and get another preemption on top of us, but help our communities do what they really want to do, which is protect their individual residents. But it's a fine line, as Mark put it. It's kind of always looming there, and you've got to keep it in your sight. Otherwise, it's going to hit you without you recognizing it. And to that end, in our state, our League of Municipalities basically has it on their lobbying agenda every single year to fight any preemption, so that it's something they're always bringing up with their lawmakers. When something in the legislature sounds like preemption, they can say, oh, our city's all voted that we don't want that, and how can we retool that? Or if you're going to preempt us and put an additional requirement on the cities, how are we going to make sure that you add a funding mechanism on that too, so we're not dealing with an unfunded mandate in that. Other areas that we've struggled with is annexation, and as cities grow around North Carolina, we're rapidly growing. We lost our ability to annex. Soft drinks was a big one, as Mark touched on. When we look at health in our communities, North Carolina preempted on soft drink taxes. And then I know a big one for a lot of us is living wage laws. And in North Carolina, they took that away, not just from contracts, but from other areas that cities could work to support our workers and make sure that people are able to keep up with inflation in our communities and be able to continue to live in our communities. And so as cities, we can still lead by example by paying our employees a living wage, but we all know that ends up not going all that far in really getting a community to pull together and move the needle. So those are a couple big ones that I noticed in North Carolina. And then broadband. Broadband, obviously, during a pandemic, as we're looking at how do our kids and workers reach the resources they need to. We've been fighting for broadband for many, many years, and we got preempted on it. A couple communities like Salisbury and Wilson did a good job implementing broadband, and they're showing successes. And we keep getting to point to them and say, look, those municipalities did like city and countywide broadband, and it's delivering, but our hands are still tied. So I was optimistic to hear about the FCC's ability to preempt the preemption, but that's definitely one we're going to continue to fight on.
Well, thank you, both of you, for your comments. And also, Mayor Ian, thank you for making that plug for people who are participating to get involved with your State Chapter, and thank you for your leadership for our Council of State Chapters. Please make sure you include any questions you may have in the chat feature. I do see a question here from Bill Hollander, council member from Louisville, Kentucky. And he asked a question: the Kentucky legislature is considering a statute which prohibits local ordinances and resolutions regarding investor-owned utility service. It's vastly overbroad, but appears to be aimed at anything designed to support renewable energy. Have you seen this type of legislation around the country?
Yes, certainly. It's endemic. And we have in Arizona, the Arizona Corporation Commission, which is considered the fifth branch of government, the fourth branch of government, excuse me. And there's been an effort there in the legislature this year to take away their powers to set renewable energy standards. And that's an existential threat to the ACC. So we've seen this, definitely across the country. In Arizona, the legislature prohibited cities from requiring benchmarking for energy. And you can't know if you're saving energy unless you measure it. And so they prohibited us from measuring the in commercial buildings, the energy that's used. So there's definitely, every time you see preemption, you have to say, who's behind this? It's not preemption that's necessarily bad. It's the corporate interests behind it who are trying to shut down innovative action or city action because they have a financial interest at stake. In the case of renewable energy, it's typically the utilities, and they typically want to control the regulators who regulate them.
Another question from council member from Louisville, Texas, Brandon Jones, asked the following. In Texas, preemption is a major issue and has been around for years. Most citizens don't understand the issue. How can we work to educate the voters to help to fight this continuing battle? Mark, you talked about how we should monitor and anticipate, unify, and engage, and also talked about how we use media. So could you touch on this question from Councilmember Jones?
Yeah, I can, and I think there are probably others on the panel and participants who can give some specific examples as well. But Texas is it's a good example. It's a very challenging environment. Every time the legislature comes in odd years, there are multiple preemption proposals, bills filed, including this blanket preemption, which has not yet been adopted. But as I said before, and I do want to put a sharp point on it, the media can be enormously helpful. In Texas, there are so many good media outlets that have covered this, and I think that the way to reach voters, the way to reach the public, the way to reach state legislators to some degree is using the media, and there's a whole art and science to that, which I'm happy to discuss offline, but maybe others have some examples of what they've done.
And can I add also, I think it's important not necessarily use the word preemption. I think preemption is kind of a wonky word, and I often like to talk about state interference in our local democracies, or the state quashing our city's decision making, and that seems to be more resounding. We always have to think about the messaging. And in Arizona, we have a long treasured value of local control, but even when we describe local control, that's also a difficult phrase to use because it implies, Big Brother is watching you or something. So I've been sticking to interference in our local democracies, and I think people get that more than they get the term preemption.
Yeah, and I would also point out that there's several messaging toolkits on the website, our website, preemptionwatch.org, that I can point you to if you have any difficulty finding them. But we have toolkits that are designed for different audiences, including more conservative audiences as well. I'm sorry, interrupted. You're going to go?
Yeah, I was going to say, so obviously the preemption is the jargon word, and so tying it to a specific local impact is always more effective. And so for us, something like broadband, to be able to say, look, we've got fiber down our main commercial corridors, but you can live a block off them and you have terrible internet. And so to tell people, like, look, there's a better opportunity out here and we could deliver it to you, except our hands are tied. And so this is an example of how we as community lawmakers aren't empowered to actually move our communities forward. And a lot of people get that and they say, well, you should have the ability to change something in my city because I'm asking you to. So why did this person down in the Capitol in Raleigh take that away from you? And then once you've created that narrative, it's easy to point future narratives to it and say, remember that broadband issue we were having? Well, this is the same situation. But you've got to do a really good job of telling that narrative. I did notice there's a question in the chat about our league in North Carolina on preemption. And so we generally do have a blanket item that's about preemption, but we've woven that into other items on our lobbying list as well, because it just comes up all over the place.
And I would add that I think the example of broadband is really excellent in terms of, I agree with Lauren as well. The example of broadband is great because if you really think about it, who's opposed to community providing this kind of essential service, health service, public health service, public safety service? Who could be opposed to that? And what we're talking about is not that forcing municipalities to do this, it's just giving them the authority to do the job that the voters have asked them to do. So I love the example of broadband and how to communicate that to the public and to the media.
And broadband has the wonderful ability to be compared to our water systems. And if you ask someone who in your community does not deserve clean drinking water, I mean, it's clear. So if we believe everybody deserves clean drinking water and electricity, and then broadband's just another utility. And we can lump it together and say, do we all equitably deserve access to this utility? And the answer is yes. So it's one of these where when we can really craft that narrative and put it very strongly into people's minds, then we can fight that battle for preemption.
Could I point out another real danger of preemption that we haven't discussed? And, or I should say, legislative interference in local democracies, is that it has a chilling effect. And Arizona has a bill, it's also called SB 1487, and where any legislator can object to any law, and we can have a quarter of our state shared revenue taken away. And it's debilitating because a council who might be thinking of an innovative idea has to go through that meeting with the city attorneys, like we might get sued, this might happen and that might happen. And that has a chilling effect. And that is one of the most vicious things about preemption, I believe, is that it really does chill action and it makes councils not want to even take that step forward to innovate.
We've seen similar here in North Carolina with the legislature coming back in and almost attacking city councils by changing charters to make them partisan. And what we really value about that community conversation all of a sudden gets gutted by the legislature saying, all right, we're gonna make you partisan, we're gonna take your powers away, and we're gonna make life hard for you, all because you're trying to get too far out there. And our council members from Charlotte and Asheville can attest to some of those challenges of butting heads with the legislature.
Yeah, in this context of preemption, unfortunately, sometimes at the state level, they take this as an opportunity to what they believe is take away powers at the local level. And then sometimes that puts our local elected officials and also some of our business partners in a very challenging dynamic. Can you talk about, for any of the panelists, how you've been able to partner with businesses and navigate these issues? Because for our constituents, they're using the goods and services that business is providing. At the same point, we're trying to address their issues and concerns at a local level. So maybe you may have some experiences where you've been able to partner with businesses on how it comes to a medium on balancing the interests of business and on the challenges that our constituents have.
A good example in Tempe is, I'm not sure if I'm creating that, sorry. So a good example in Tempe is when we were fighting for earned sick days. Eventually we took that battle statewide, and thank you everyone on the call who helped with that. And we actually got increased minimum wage and earned sick days across the state. But when we were fighting this issue in Tempe, we had a host of businesses approach us and say, we have no problem paying a higher minimum wage, having earned sick days. In fact, we do that. In fact, we have paid time off, and we find are, because we pay higher, we have we have more retention of our employees. So Changing Hands is an independent, beloved bookstore in Tempe, and they were on board. Mountain Park Health Center, who provides insurance, provides healthcare to those who are insured and uninsured. They stepped forward. We had a lot of businesses who said, why is this a problem? We need to raise standards, and we have better employees because we have earned sick days, and because we trust that if someone's sick, that they need to stay home and not leave a paycheck behind. So that was a perfect, when we see worker protections, there's always businesses that we first approach who are in line with those values and are willing to stand up and fight for them. And they've been really crucial in our fight. Because you always hear the Chamber of Commerce, that earned sick days are going to kill jobs, and increased minimum wage is going to kill jobs. And it just doesn't happen.
Yes, to send that same note, with anti-discrimination, we reached out to our employers and asked kind of for them to write letters saying why having anti-discrimination rules are so important. And as Mark put it, there's ceilings and floors in preemption. And so North Carolina, the preemption was really to make sure the ceiling was really low. And what we got were letters from, in Burlington, LabCorp is headquartered. And so they said, look, we are a global company and anti-discrimination is critical to our business. And here's our statement. We saw that from companies of all sizes. And so what it showed our council and our community was that the natural ceiling of business in our community was already way up there. And it just made the legislative rule seem all that much more out of place. We haven't yet had the opportunity to make progress on it, but that's the rule of preemption. After it's in place, it's hard.
Well, just want to thank all of you for joining our Municipal Monday conversation on the preemption landscape. I want to thank Mark Pertschuk for giving us all of his background experience and kind of an overview regarding preemption and ways that we can use and tactics to address this issue, as well as Mayor Ian Baltutis and Councilmember Lauren Kuby for also providing their background and experience in this issue. Also, as Mayor Ian said earlier, if you're interested in organizing with other local elected officials in your state, both on the preemption issue or other local issues, the monthly DMO Council of State Chapters call is taking place at the top of the hour at 4:00 p.m. Immediately following this conversation, we're posting the link in the chat. We're encouraging all of you to join the 4:00 call and learn more. In addition, we're encouraging all of you to be on the lookout for additional Municipal Monday conversations like this, where we at Democratic municipal officials try to provide vital and key information that you can use as you provide the goods and services and address the policy issues in your jurisdiction. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Look forward to seeing you at the 4:00 call, as well as participating in future Democratic Municipal Mondays and other events. Thanks again.